Yeah, yeah. No, that's good. Five, four, three, two, one. Well, kia ora, everyone, and welcome to a mini hoon here on the Kaka on Substack Live. I'm Bernard Hickey, and I'm joined today by two disability advocates, Nick Gruane on your left and Blake Forbes on your right. Thank you very much for joining us, Blake and Nick.
You're welcome, Bernard. And how are you today?
Thanks, Bernard.
I'm great. I'm in the sun and enjoying the late autumn. But I wanted to find out a bit more about what's happening with the government's funding of disability services, and in particular, a program which has been previously funded by the government and by councils that allows people to get out of the house and move around and do whatever they need. Firstly, Nick, could you explain for us, for those people who don't know about it, what the total mobility service is and how we've got to where we are now?
Sure. Thanks, Bernard. Total Mobility is a scheme that's been around for a really long time. It started in its infancy in the early 80s. So it's been around for a really, really long time. So essentially what it does is provide subsidized transport in the form of taxi subsidies, it, really up to 75% subsidies in a three-way subsidy, some from government, some from local council, and then the end user pays the final 25%. In order for people with long-term disabilities to get around and to get from their home to, maybe they might be going shopping, maybe they might be going to a doctor's appointment, maybe they might be going to visit family, friends, and partner. And like I said, it's been around for an incredibly long time. It's part of the disability support system. It enables disabled people um, to get out of their homes, to get into the community at a subsidized cost, because everyone knows that disabled people are some of the lowest paid people. If they are in employment, they're earning some of the lowest wages in our society. So the subsidization of our taxis are really critical. And it also provides funding for the payment, so that taxi providers can put them in hoists and all sorts of other accessibility features into our taxis. So it's a really critical part of our accessibility system, and it's just one of those necessary features in order for our disability community to participate in society. And yeah, it's just so much part of the fabric of our community and our society. Um, and last year we started to hear some rumours that the government was looking to trim back the costs of total mobility, because the costs were getting out of control. And for me, I was just astonished by that, because the cost of total mobility is just so minuscule when you compare it to the funding pool that it comes from, which is the National Land Transport Fund, which is billions and billions of dollars that funds all roads and all of those things. So I did some research last year and looked at through an OAA request and looked at what was actually happening. And it's true that there are more people using total mobility. I just looked at the amount of trips, and the trips in 2018 were 1.8 million, and those have increased to 2.6 million. So it's true that the number of trips are increasing, and the So yeah, so the trips are increasing. That is not in question, and the reason for that is because we do have a large number of people in Auckland who are over the age of 65, who are using total mobility. So that's the reason for that. Um, but the government has taken those numbers and looked at that and decided that because those trips are costing money, then they need to look at trimming the overall scheme back and having a look at the scheme through what they term as the total mobility review. and that's something that started late last year. So what they talked about was reducing the total subsidy from 75% down to 65%, and introducing a regional fare cap, which is the part that the local government pays. So reducing that fare cap by 10%. And essentially what they're doing is shifting the cost from the Crown onto local government and also onto the user, which meets their goal of being fiscally neutral, which is your point, Bernard. But it's also about shifting costs onto councils and also onto the user, which is the disabled person. So that's kind of where we got to and where we are.
Thanks. That's a good backgrounder on it. Blake, could I ask you how you use total mobility and how important it is in your life?
Well, I use it to go and advocate with Nick and go to the doctors and go out with my family and so on and so forth. So it's a really vital part of the community, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that in a few minutes, but that's the reason why, I use it to get around.
And the current review, which could reduce the percentage of the subsidy and push some of the costs onto disabled people themselves and on councils, what impact do you think that might have on your ability to do what you need to do?
It will really restrict what I'm able to do if it were to happen. Because it will affect stuff like me going to help Nick and go to the doctor and all of that kind of stuff. So just the reverse of what I said before. So the reverse will happen.
And Nick, how do you use it, and how might the changes, which haven't been finalised yet, but how might the changes affect you?
Yeah, similar. I mean, I have had my total mobility card for probably about 10 years, and I use it in a similar fashion, going to the supermarket, going to medical appointments, going to the hospital, going to visit friends, family, whānau. I sometimes use it for return trips from the city. I live in Wellington, so going from Wellington back to my home. And it will mean that I will have to use public transport, use buses, which for me, I have a mobility impairment, and using public transport in the evening is just not safe sometimes, because we have many people that use public transport, which is really positive, and I encourage that. But for disabled people, sometimes using public transport is not a good option, not the best option, not a safe option. So that's why I choose to use a taxi, because it's just safer and it's more accessible and inclusive for myself to use it.
Yeah. Blake, could you tell us perhaps a bit more about how the taxis operate, what makes them different, and the people who are operating the taxis? Because I understand some taxi drivers, some taxi services specialise in this sort of work.
Yeah. So for me, I use driving this Daisy, which is a companion service. So they put you in a back of a German-style lift car. So that's the ones with the little ramps that go down, and then they put it up and shut the back doors. So it's not like your traditional electric hoist where they put it up. If I butchered that explaining, maybe Nick can help then.
Yeah, I'm curious too about the people who are driving these cars, who must have some special skills, some special equipment, but also become, colleagues, companions, people who you get to see every day, or every wee while.
Yeah. So they become like family, you say, and you have great banter and all that kind of thing.
And Nick, could you tell us about what the various services, taxi services, and others are worried about advocating for and think might happen with the potential changes proposed?
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. Great question. I've done quite a bit of work with the taxi industry around this, and I know that they are big supporters of total mobility. It's a big part of their business, and but I know that the current business model hasn't been looked at in terms of the funding for um, particularly around things like taxi hoists, and also something that they call the lift fee, which is the fee that tax services like Driving Miss Daisy get when they have to assist passengers, particularly wheelchair users, into a taxi. That hasn't been looked at for over 20 years. And it's not in line with, I know, it's not in line with our international partners, like, for example, Australia. So the lift fee here is just way out of line. So, I mean, one of the positive things to come out of the Total Mobility Review, and it is that we are going to look at lifting our lift fee, which is a nice phrase, but and also putting more money into providing access for providing funding to our taxi providers and our small vehicle providers that do provide the great service like just spoke about. Because without them, ultimately, we won't have a total mobility system and service. So I think that's a really critical part of this discussion. And in order for them to have that funding, that's a really critical part of it.
Blake, I just wanted to ask you, what's the feedback from the government? What was the problem they're trying to solve here? And
So that's what I'm gonna say. We've met with the minister in the last 2 days. So we met with Mr. Bishop at the Parliament and expressed all the concerns. And he said he claimed that there was a $265 million hole, which was the reason why they can't keep it at 75%. And maybe Nick could go into a bit more of that, but that's the one thing that really stood out for me. The other one was that they're looking to change the who qualifies. So that's a big red flag for me.
yeah, Nick, could you tell us a bit more about the proposed changes to reduce the number of people who are able to get into the scheme and the number of times they can use it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The big problem that this government is looking to solve is really to get rid of that $265 million that Blake just mentioned there, because as we all know, that this government is fascinated with getting rid of budget holes and squaring off the books. And this
It's interesting though, the way they've framed the issue is to say that there's a hole in the budget. What they're actually talking about here is that the costs of providing this publicly accessible service, which everyone expects and which has built up over time because our population has increased and there are more people with disabilities, and obviously we want to improve the services, is that the government doesn't want to pay that cost. So they've framed it as, the cost has gone up beyond what it had been previously. And that's where the hole comes from. Can you give us a sense of how much the cost has increased and why? How much is just normal population growth and issues with more people having more disabilities?
Yeah, I suspect it's just population growth, to be honest, Bernard. I think it's just the fact that we have a growing elderly population, and that growing elderly population is accessing the service, and maybe the service just hasn't been funded to meet that population growth over time, and that hole that the minister is talking about is not being met because choices are being made in other directions by this current government. I mean, if the minister really wanted to fund total mobility, he could. I mean, this is a rounding error and an accounting error in the National Land Transport Fund. And if he wanted to fund it, he could, no problem at all.
It's actually about it's about the cost of 1 kilometre of
Mhm.
the road of national significance from Warkworth to Te Hana, a project which has a benefit to cost ratio of less than 1.
Mhm.
Do you have a sense of how many people currently might be affected by the changes in eligibility and subsidies, in terms of numbers of people who couldn't use it in future, and how many times a day that they might not, or how many times a week they might not be able to use it, and whether or not some of the services might have to go out of business?
Sure. Well, I mean, we know that there are over 100,000 people in Auckland that use the scheme at the moment. And we also know that that there was what was it? There are so there are 100,000 users in Auckland at the moment, and those are the users that are being targeted to come out of the scheme because they are the user profile that are 65 and over, and they are the users that the minister is looking to, if you like, to use quite terms that some people might find challenging. That trying to the eligibility criteria are being set around people with long-term disabilities and health conditions, and that's where the focus is going on the long-term, in order to make total mobility financially sustainable. So,
Have you got a sense? Have you got a sense, Blake, on where the threshold is going to be set, and therefore who might miss out?
Well, if you allow me to go back to the meeting that we had,
Sure.
for a minute, one thing I found astonishing, and this kind of ties in with your questions, that he admitted during that meeting that they didn't even do a social economic study, and he didn't even know what it was.
All right. So this was a study which looks at the extra costs on the wider system if you do change the eligibility. Because I'm guessing there'll be some people who, because they can't get out of the house anymore, may not be able to go to the doctor. Therefore, they're going to end up in hospital. They're going to cost the system more overall. Is that the sort of thing we're talking about?
I'll give that to Nick because he's better at doing that social stuff than me. But he basically admitted that he didn't even know what it was. Isn't that correct, Nick?
yeah, I mean, usually when we have big changes like this, we will do a regulatory impact statement. But when I asked the minister about whether there was a risk or a regulatory impact statement done, he claimed that there was none, and there also wasn't a social impact assessment done. And the reason for that was because it wasn't regulatory. There was no legislation passed. And I found that really astonishing, considering the impact on the population group that we are talking about here. Not even to do any form of impact assessment on the disability community seems to be, quite astonishing.
What was more astonishing is he actually admitted he didn't know what it was.
Yeah, because this government has made a big point of looking at social development spending through a social investment lens, which is all about, in theory, targeting spending to areas where there's the biggest impact, and using the data from the big data warehouse the government has on spending and costs and that sort of thing. Because otherwise, there's a risk here that, let's say, you cut back on the spending on total mobility, and before you knew it, you've got more admissions to the emergency departments of hospitals, and you've got more time spent in high-cost hospital wards from people getting sick. Not to mention, other conditions that might develop, mental health problems, or, complications from various conditions. So that seems bizarre to me. Just to finish up, Blake, what's the current situation now in terms of when we find out what the result of the review is, and how much time we have before the X comes down?
the initial changes are July 1st as it stands, but Mr. Bishop has failed to articulate, and he said he wasn't ready to articulate it at the meeting when some of those final stages will be finalised. So we're actually going to go into the 1st of July not knowing some of the criteria by the looks of it.
So at this stage, we've got a government making a decision to save itself $360 million or so for a service used 1.8 million times a year without having done a social benefit or cost analysis looking at the wider impacts across government. And they're doing it with just maybe days to spare and little time for people to understand the criteria or get ready to change their arrangements or, shut down their businesses or do whatever they need to do. Nick, do you think they're actually going to get this through by July the 1st? Because once that happens, you start to get quite close to the election and people stop making decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine they will. They're pretty good at slamming things through. That's probably not the right word, but getting things done on tight deadlines. I think the real risk for this one is the population group in Auckland that's going to be impacted by this, because we're talking a large number of people aged over 65 in Auckland who will have an entitlement that they used to take for granted, which will potentially now be taken away from them. And people don't like it when things are taken away from them that they used to take for granted. And I think that is the real risk around this. And I think that's what's taking them time to really consider whether they actually want to pull the trigger on this one, because people over 65 don't like it when you take things away from them. And you're right, Bernard, to point out it's election year. So that's probably what is actually taking the time, because I think they may actually have it all sorted, and they're just going back and forth and thinking, do we actually want to do this to that group in Auckland this year?
Do you have a sense, Nick, if the opposition parties and the other parties in government, in particular New Zealand First, are aware of this and are campaigning to stop it or to advocate to change it?
Yeah, I'm not sure about I know that there's a lot of horse trading going on at the moment within the in terms of the budget process with the opposition parties, but I'm not certain as to whether it's extended down this far to total mobility. It may well have done. It possibly could have done, and that may well be what's holding things up. But yeah, the impact will be on that group, and that's where the focus will go. So yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought New Zealand First would be pretty keen to advocate for the interests of disabled people in Auckland over the age of 65, where the election is going to be decided. We'll see what happens there. Hey, I wanted to thank you both for coming on to a mini hoon here on the Kaka. Nick Ruang and Blake Forbes, disability advocates.
Thank you, Bernard.
Coming on to the show.
You, really appreciate
great to see you here, and thank you to all of our subscribers who've come on today. Ka kite anō.
Ka kite.